Imagine being only 15 years old. One morning, you are in your village, surrounded by family. By nightfall, you are torn from their arms and dragged across strange lands. Your destination is whispered about as paradise. The Sultan's harem. At first glance, it looks like a dream. Golden chambers glimmer under candlelight. Silk robes brush against marble floors. Jewels sparkle in patterns on the walls. From the outside, it looks like heaven. But inside, it was something else. It was not paradise. It was a prison. A cage, wrapped in silk and luxury. A place where beauty became dangerous. A place where survival meant erasing who you were. The harem was never about romance. It was not about love. It was about control. It was about power. And it was about destroying lives for the glory of one man. Girls were taken from Christian families across the empire. Circassians, Georgians, Ukrainians, Greeks, Albanians. Some were stolen by raiders. Others were sold by their own families, lured by promises of wealth and power. Some parents believed it was a blessing. For the girls, it was the end of freedom. By the time they arrived in Istanbul, they were no longer daughters. They were property. The empire saw them as raw material for the Sultan's pleasure, and what awaited them was not safety, but the beginning of a nightmare. The journey into the harem did not end with arrival. It only grew worse. The first trial was selection, and the process was brutal. Girls as young as 8 were examined like cattle. Their teeth were checked. Their skin was touched. Their bodies were measured. Every flaw was recorded. Every detail judged. The inspection was invasive. It was not enough to be beautiful. They had to be perfect. Any scar could end their chances. Any sign of illness could mean rejection. One grotesque practice was deliberate infestation. Girls were given lice. The way their bodies reacted was studied. This was not treatment. It was a cruel medical test. Even sleep was not private. Guards and overseers watched the girls through the night. They judged the way they breathed. They judged if they twitched or whispered in dreams. Sanity itself became part of the examination. Those who passed were stripped of names. Their identities erased. They were forced to convert to Islam. They were told their families were dead. They were told their past no longer existed. From then on, they belonged only to the palace. Their future was education in obedience. Their lessons were not for themselves. They were to serve the Sultan. Every moment shaped them into tools for another man's desire. It was not a school. It was training for captivity, a system designed to break them before they even met the Sultan. Life inside the harem was not about freedom. It was about discipline. The girls were forced into a strict education. They learned languages. They learned Turkish, Persian, Arabic. Some were trained in Greek or Latin if they came from noble families. Every word they spoke was monitored. Every mistake was punished. Music filled the chambers. They were taught to play the lute. They learned songs and poems. They memorized verses that praised the empire. But these arts were not meant for their joy. They were meant to please the Sultan. Dance was another lesson. Every movement had meaning. They practiced graceful steps on marble floors. They rehearsed until their feet bled. Smiles were forced as part of performance. Even their diets were controlled. Meals were measured. Fruits, nuts, and herbs were chosen to keep them youthful. Spices were given to sharpen the senses. They were told their beauty was not their own. It belonged to the empire. Baths became rituals. Their bodies were scrubbed until raw. Oils and perfumes were rubbed into their skin. They were polished like treasures. Every gesture prepared them for a man they might never meet. Above all, they were trained in obedience. To bow, to serve, to smile when afraid, to compete with each other for scraps of attention. It was called education, but it was training for captivity, a system designed to erase the child and create a tool. The truth is that most women in the harem never saw the Sultan. The palace could hold more than 1,000 concubines, but only a handful were chosen. For the rest, life was endless, waiting. They grew up behind golden doors. They aged inside marble halls. But they were forgotten. The hierarchy was cruel. At the bottom were servants. Above them were the ordinary concubines. Then came the favourites. And at the very top, the wives who bore heirs. But even reaching the top was not victory. A wife's power ended the moment her son grew up. She could be exiled to the old palace, her influence gone, her name erased. For the thousands below, obscurity was guaranteed. They woke each morning to the sound of bells. They followed the same routines of bathing, lessons, and prayer. But each day ended in the same silence. No summons came. Many died without ever meeting the man they were trained for. They had been raised to serve a single person, yet that person never even looked at them. Still, they competed. Every woman dreamed of rising higher. Every smile hid a rivalry. Every kind word was a mask. The harem forced them to see each other not as sisters, but as enemies. It was a world of waiting, a world of ambition, and for most, a world of disappointment. The palace sparkled with jewels, but behind the glitter, countless women withered away in silence. Discipline inside the harem was harsh. Every mistake, even the smallest, was punished. The women lived under constant fear. A wrong glance at a eunuch could mean lashes. 50 strikes across the back until skin tore open. Sometimes food was taken away for days. Hunger became another weapon. Depression was not tolerated. Those who wept too much were locked in dark cells, alone with no light, no sound, no hope. Isolation was used to break their spirit. The threat of exile haunted every concubine. The old palace was a place of living death. Once sent there, a woman was forgotten. She would spend her days in silence until she withered away. The most terrifying punishments were executions. Whispers told of nights when whole groups were condemned. Sultan Ibrahim's cruelty became legend. He ordered 280 concubines sewn into sacks. They were thrown into the Bosphorus. Their bodies drifted like ghosts beneath the waves. Fear lived in every corner of the palace. Every servant could be an informer. Every eunuch could decide a girl's fate. Every rival could whisper a lie that ended in death. Smiles were masks. Behind jeweled veils were trembling hearts. Punishment was always close, waiting for the smallest mistake. The harem shined with gold, but beneath its beauty was terror. Terror that turned young girls into silent prisoners. Surveillance ruled the harem. There were no secrets. There was no privacy. Every word a girl spoke could be reported. Every gesture could be twisted into an offense. Even a sigh of sadness might be seen as rebellion. The eunuchs were the watchers. They controlled doors. They controlled food. They controlled every passage through the palace. No one moved without their permission. But the most effective system of control was the women themselves. The concubines were forced to monitor each other. They lived in constant suspicion. Every friendship was dangerous. Every kindness could become betrayal. Whispers travelled like fire. A single rumour could destroy a life. If one girl looked too close at another's gown, it might be reported as envy. If she lingered too long in prayer, it might be called disobedience. The safest choice was silence. Yet silence was also dangerous. The Sultan wanted laughter, music, and beauty. So they smiled even when they wanted to cry. They danced even when they were breaking inside. Their performance was survival. The harem turned victims into enforcers. Women crushed each other for a chance to rise. Loyalty was almost impossible. Sisterhood could mean death. The palace walls glittered with gold. But behind them lived a world where trust was poison. A world where women became both captives and guards of their own prison. The eunuchs were the gatekeepers of the harem. They had been mutilated as children. Their manhood was taken away so they could serve without temptation. But the empire turned their pain into power. They held the keys to every door. They decided who could move and who could not. Food, water, clothing, even medicine passed through their hands. Without their permission, nothing reached the concubines. On the surface, they were protectors. They kept outsiders from entering. They guarded the Sultan's secrets. They ensured no other man touched the women. But to the concubines, they were tormentors. They humiliated the girls with cruel inspections. They reported every misstep to their masters. They laughed at their suffering. They reminded them daily of their captivity. Some eunuchs grew rich with power. They manipulated rivalries among the women. They accepted bribes for favors. They whispered lies that could raise one concubine and destroy another. The women learned to fear them. A smile from a eunuch could mean survival. A frown could mean death. Their presence was constant, like shadows in the corridors. Every bath was watched. Every rehearsal was observed. Every glance was judged. The girls were never alone. The eunuchs had been victims once. But inside the palace, they became enforcers. They were proof that in the harem, pain did not vanish. It simply changed hands. Rivalry was the heartbeat of the harem. Every woman wanted to rise. But there was room for only a few. Concubines plotted in silence. They watched each other with careful eyes. Every smile could hide an enemy. Every gift could be poisoned. Some slipped powders into cups of wine. Others tampered with food and perfume. A sudden illness could remove a rival. No one asked questions when a woman wasted away. False accusations were another weapon. A whisper in the right ear could destroy a reputation. A rumor of disobedience could send a girl to the old palace. A suggestion of betrayal could cost her life. Pregnancies were sabotaged. Jealous rivals sent herbs to cause miscarriages. Some bribed midwives to ensure disaster. The birth of a son could make one woman powerful, so others did everything to prevent it. Even the closest friendships were tested. Sisters turned against each other. Alliances broke apart. The harem taught them that survival meant cruelty. At the top, favorites lived like queens, but their fall could come overnight. A single mistake, a single rumor, and they were gone. Every woman knew she was replaceable. Every woman lived in fear of being forgotten. The harem glittered with luxury, but its true treasure was power. And for that power, women destroyed each other. For the few who bore sons, life became even more dangerous. A child could raise a concubine to the highest rank, but that same child could also seal her death. Mothers of princes lived in constant fear. Every boy was a rival to the throne. Every birth threatened the balance of power. And in the palace, rivals were never safe. Assassins moved in silence. Food could be poisoned. Nurses could be bribed. A cradle could be overturned in the night. Some mothers slept beside their children. They never closed their eyes fully. Every sound in the dark felt like a threat. Every servant's footsteps echoed like danger. The palace played cruel games. One son would be favoured. The others were seen as obstacles. It was common for princes to be strangled by order of the sultan. Mothers could only watch as their children disappeared. For those who survived, the fear never ended. A child who reached manhood might become sultan. But by then, his mother was already exiled. She lost her influence the moment he no longer needed her. The harem was a place where motherhood was poisoned. Love was twisted into fear. Every embrace carried the weight of danger. Every kiss was shadowed by the possibility of loss. To bear a son was the highest honor, but it was also the deepest curse. Time was the cruelest enemy inside the harem. Every wrinkle was a warning. Every strand of grey hair was a sentence. The girls were chosen for youth. They were praised for beauty, but beauty never lasted. And once it faded, so did their worth. Older concubines watched younger girls replace them. They saw their power slip away. They saw their smiles lose value. They knew the sultan's eyes would never turn back. Some tried to hold on. They used oils and powders to cover their faces. They wore jewels to hide the years. But no ornament could stop time. Those who once held influence found themselves ignored. Their names were forgotten at feasts. Their places taken at ceremonies. Their voices silenced in the corridors. For some, the decline was unbearable. They chose poison. They chose the river. They chose to end what the palace had already ended. Others were exiled, sent to the old palace to live among the forgotten. There they aged in silence. There they waited for death. The harem offered no dignity in old age. It offered no honor for years of service. A woman who once glittered in silk could end as a shadow, her beauty gone, her memory erased. In the palace, time was not gentle. It was merciless. It turned queens into ghosts long before they died. The harem was not only a place of whispers. At times it became a place of screams. There were nights when fear turned into massacre. One of the most infamous stories was under Sultan Ibrahim. He was known as the Mad Sultan. One night, he ordered the deaths of hundreds of women. 280 concubines were dragged from their chambers. Their cries echoed in the marble halls. They were sewn into sacks. The sacks were carried to the shore. One by one, they were thrown into the Bosphorus. The river swallowed them. Their bodies sank like shadows. Some say fishermen later saw them drifting under the moonlight. The city was haunted by the sight for years. This was not the only massacre. Over the centuries, rulers purged the harem to remove rivals. A new sultan often cleared out the women of the old. To them, it was political. To the women, it was slaughter. Even those who survived were scarred. Every rustle of footsteps in the night felt like the signal of death. Every shout in the corridors made them tremble. They never knew if tomorrow would be their last day. The palace glittered like paradise, but beneath its beauty, the blood of countless women stained its history. The harem was not just a prison. At times, it was a graveyard. Silence was the rule of the harem. The women were not allowed to speak their truth. They were commanded to smile, even when broken inside. Every corridor echoed with laughter. Every hall shimmered with music. But behind the noise was despair. The joy was only performance. Tears were forbidden. If a girl wept, she risked punishment. If she cried too loudly, she risked exile. Her sadness was called disobedience. So they hid their sorrow. They painted their faces with powder. They masked their voices with songs. They danced while their hearts cracked in silence. To outsiders, the harem looked like paradise. Visitors saw silks, jewels, and smiling faces. They saw beauty. They saw elegance. They never saw the fear. Inside, the women became actresses of survival. They learned to show what the sultan wanted. They learned to conceal their pain. Every gesture was practiced. Every word rehearsed. This silence was the deepest prison. Chains could be broken. Walls could be climbed. But silence was harder to escape. It followed them into every corner of the palace. It smothered their memories. It suffocated their dreams. The harem was not only guarded by eunuchs and locks, it was guarded by silence. A silence that demanded obedience. A silence that turned women into shadows of themselves. Beauty was the key to the harem, but it was also the curse. The very gift that brought the girls inside became their prison. A beautiful face meant attention. It meant the possibility of rising. It meant silk robes, jewels, and perhaps even the sultan's eye. But it also meant jealousy. It also meant danger. The more radiant a woman appeared, the more enemies she gained. Others plotted against her. They poisoned her oils. They whispered lies about her conduct. Her beauty painted a target on her back. Even the sultan's affection was not protection. A favorite today could be forgotten tomorrow. One sign of displeasure, one rumor of disloyalty, and she was gone. The higher she climbed, the harder she fell. Some tried to hide their looks. They wore simple clothes. They kept to the shadows. They thought invisibility would protect them. But in the harem, invisibility meant exile. There was no escape. Too much beauty meant danger. Too little beauty meant abandonment. Either way, a woman's worth was chained to her appearance. And as years passed, the curse only deepened. A wrinkle erased her value. A scar ended her chances. The palace that once praised her beauty now ignored her completely. The harem turned beauty into a sentence. It gave women the illusion of power, but in reality, it tied them to a cycle of envy, rivalry, and decline. What should have been a blessing became their doom. The harem was built to look like paradise. Golden walls reflected torchlight. Marble halls echoed with music. Perfume lingered in the air like a dream. But behind the beauty was pain. Behind the jewels were scars. Behind the silks were broken lives. For centuries, thousands of girls entered the palace. Some rose for a moment. Most vanished into silence. Their names erased. Their voices buried. History remembers the power of sultans. It remembers the grandeur of the empire. It remembers the towers, the mosques, the armies. But it rarely remembers the women. Their suffering was hidden in shadows. Their cries were muffled by music. Their struggles were dressed in silk and gold. They were told to smile, so the world would never see their despair. Even now, the question lingers. Were they prisoners or survivors? Were they powerless, or did they carve secret strength? Were they forgotten, or do their stories still whisper through the palace walls? The harem stands empty today. Its marble floors are cold, its chambers are silent. But silence is not the same as peace. The air still carries echoes. The walls still remember, and when we listen closely, we cannot help but wonder what secrets are still hidden behind the veils of history.